I'm very happy to be joined on the stage by this esteemed panel of experts. We're going to have a very thoughtful 20 minutes now about how data feeds into the decisions that policymakers are making today with regards to the short, medium, and long term for labour markets. I wonder if, for all of us today, when we think about data, there seems to be a flood of it. There is so much, both in terms of real time and historic, and it's getting bigger every day. And we have to manage that data and choose the right information to fuel our policies. Perhaps, given Dr. Jean, your experience, it might be worth starting with you on this subject. How do you feel that data can be properly used to help inform our decisions when it comes to constructing efficient labour markets?
So my responses really will be framed from the vantage point of a data user on gender equality and women's rights in relation to data-driven approaches to labour market governance. So if we're looking at future labour market trends and required skills which are aligned with labour market demand, then national labour force data, company data, industry-wide data does and should demonstrate patterns in business ownership, employee worker representation by sector, subsector, education, occupation, skill, wage levels, also disaggregated by sex, by age, by migration status, by nationality status, and others, at minimum, at current levels, at future levels, based on economic and market trends, number one. Number two, it does demonstrate, data does demonstrate the enablers, the constraints to current and future employment, and does provide a catalog of good practices that we can use or customize to fix these constraints. Thirdly, it helps in actually matching employer and employee skills, or skills matching between employers and employees. It helps in constructing, in developing national and regional occupational benchmarks and standards, in developing training, skills development programs that actually are linked with these standards and with labour market demand, in assessing workers' skills, verifying workers' skills, recognizing workers' skills linked to these standards and demand with commensurate wages, benefits, which should be circumscribed with decent work policies. And finally, with respect to women migrant workers or migrant workers in general, it does help, it should help to link skills with a variety of labor mobility, skills mobility schemes and programs that have worker protection at its core and that also focus on good enforcement and monitoring. And finally, it does help a whole range of policies circumscribing these issues, which we will come to later. Thank you.
I mean, these are practical aspects of how data is being used. And Raphael, I'm kind of holding you in reserve because you're the statistician. And I think that I wanted to kind of get a general approach to data before I let you loose on the subject. So if Andreas, I can jump to you as the kind of almost foreign minister for the OECD, is kind of your role. How does data come into your everyday life when you're talking to other policymakers in other countries and looking to get the OECD's work done?
No, thanks so much. I think if the current situation learns us or teaches us anything, it's that we need to have a new approach to data. So we need to find new ways to collect data, also using non-traditional sources like mobile phone. For example, all of you, this thing brought us through the COVID pandemic. It brought us through the COVID pandemic because it helped us to track, trace, and measure. And then it helped us also to manage the vaccination campaign. If I talk to my Indian friend, the Indian Sherpa, he tells me that they have managed to vaccinate 1 billion Indian people without having a paper. If you go in other countries, all the vaccination was done by paper. So this shows that these machines, this revolution we are currently in, requires new approaches to data, requires new approaches to use the data. And this brings me to the second point that I wanted to raise, because our topic here is labor market also. I mean, our first preliminary research shows that I think 27% of all jobs are at the risk of automation. But at the same time, if we ask now the people in the labor markets whether they fear artificial intelligence, about 63% of the people are telling us, no, it's a good thing, it makes our life easier at work. So in sum, I think it's too early to judge, and there is a need to really look more carefully at the data we need and to look at it. What is the data we get telling us about what to do and how to adjust our policies?
Thank you. Raphael, so International Labour Organization, very much at the heart of this subject. You're responsible as much as anybody for how the data and information is being used and compiled. I mean, what's your feeling in terms of how to best mobilize this information to deliver the effective policies that we need for labor markets around the world?
Well, thank you. I think you have triggered a very interesting topic because, of course, we have heard a very enthusiastic, from the user's perspective, about the need and I would say the avalanche of data that we are all subject to every day. And precisely labor issues are specifically, I think, well suited in terms of a long tradition on having measures and metrics for all dimensions, and of course how we harness this to promote better and informed policies is a key issue. And there, from the perspective of the producers and compilers of data, I think we are really in a data revolution, and this is what everybody experiments in the small scale, even at the individual scale. However, we need to have some governance on that, and labor market information is not, I would say, something that is fashionable or it's a fad, or no, it's increasingly used by many stakeholders with different policy implications. We have business, we have workers, we have governments, we have private sector, we have technology companies that all produces data in different ways, and the challenge is how to give this, to shape them, of also how to really transmit the transparency, the good practices, how countries can produce and provide to the policymakers the best of it. Of course, engaging in the new forms of having new sources. We have big data, we have mobile data, we have many new forms of the artificial intelligence is producing a lot of data. But how to harness this is a challenge. And I think having good data is not only for present policies, it's also for forecasting, for anticipating skills, for anticipating demands, for new emerging topics that are popping up every day. Digital, we have heard today, digital platform workers, how to measure this, these are things that are new. So I think we have this wealth, but we have to be very cautious on how to have a strong governance at the country level, at the global level, and to provide the best to the users, in particular the citizens. It's the ultimate goal.
I think that it's fascinating to hear how the different sources of data play into this topic, but it strikes me, again, from a layman's view, that if I look at, Andreas mentioned the mobile phone, if I look at the data points there that are being collected every day, whether it's by Google or LinkedIn, and how they relate to labor markets around the world, that real-time data isn't necessarily immediately available to your organization or yours or yours even. And so how do governments effectively make policies when there is essentially a shadow entity, if you like, that has better data, faster access to that, and can then do things that almost can work against what your organizations are doing? I mean, is this something that plays into your conversations at the moment?
Well, I think linking with that, big data is not a lot of information. Big data provides massive data, but it has to provide massive information. That means that we have this type of new sources of data that can help us a lot, skills anticipation, matching of demand and intermediation, whatever, but we have to be cautious on how to really take advantage of the best things. They are unstructured data. It's
so
not
quality is a part
quality is a challenge, and quality has to be, at least, I would say, governed in a sense.
Dr. Jean, when it comes to the issue of having the right data to support working on gender parity, do you feel that there are too many data gaps these days, particularly in certain regions, to actually help us frame the right policies and decisions?
Yes, I do think so. There are plenty of challenges with respect to gender equality and women's rights. And this starts from something as basic as a lack of consciousness, a lack of conceptual clarity on gender equality and women's rights, which then translates into a lack of understanding of the significance of sex disaggregated data and gender statistics, a lack of political will, a lack of resources for it. So it's as basic as that. Second, the lack then of capacity, technical capacity in data collection, in your interview processes. Something as simple as asking men what the priorities of women are when you're doing a study on women, or asking underserved rural women whether they work and who works in the household. You're going to get very distorted data because, as you know, men rarely know what women's priorities are. And number two, women, like the rest of rural communities or even other communities, also have internalized this construct of themselves primarily as caregivers and men as workers. Agricultural labor done by women is often seen as an extension of the domestic work. Unpaid care work is not counted, not seen as work. The third thing is a lack of coordination between data producers and affected women in particular, and women users of data, and this affects the quality of data use. We don't even know how this data is used. Thirdly, there is also, in many spaces, in many contexts, there is limited democratic space, and gender equality, women's rights issues have sensitivities around them. And so there are prohibitions or constraints to data collection, censoring of data, or not allowing data to be put out in the public space, so to speak. So that's another issue that we face. And then another issue is very often there's this thing about there's no data, and we need large data sets, and of course good information, good quality data. But the point is, we need to ask ourselves, what is this data going to be used for? And that mediates the forms of data, the data collection techniques, and quite often you have good qualitative data out there that serves various purposes, and this need for big data, or we don't have data, often becomes a pretext for not doing anything. So these are some of the challenges that we face.
Yeah, I mean, it seems as if not just the quality is around who's trying to gather it and do they understand the issues, yes. But also, what does it tell you? But ultimately, what are you trying to achieve? Is it just about getting anyone into any job? Or is there a broader issue of prosperity and helping people to thrive? And Andreas, I come to you because, the OECD has been so synonymous over decades with this idea of prosperity, of growing that opportunity. And it feels as if maybe we're at a point where we don't know what information we need to have or what to use to ensure a new kind of blueprint for prosperity that is driven by science and proper structure of that purpose.
Thanks so much. Excellent question. $1 million question, I would even say. So we at the OECD, we have the philosophy over decades. You cannot manage if you can measure it, if you cannot measure it. So you can only manage if you can measure things. And then the second element, and this is where both my co-panelists have left it, and also your question, Blas. We are in a moment where we have a huge quantum leap in the quantity of data, but we do not yet know what does it mean for the quality of data. That means that you need to have more skills. You need to have first more skills of the people to interpret the data and to make sound policies out of this data. So you need to have more skills, capabilities of policymakers, but also of people, of technicians, statisticians, people in the labor market, what to do with this kind of data. The second thing, there is this issue which we've been discussing of privacy and security of the data. There are some data in this big data business which may not be right to be available for everyone. And of course, there's a difference between a European approach, which is a very regulated approach, and an Indian approach, which is a very open source approach. So we need to find a middle way. Third element, what I believe, what it's important for us also in terms of making data available for prosperity at the end of the day, is data quality consistency. We need to kind of make sure that the data we are collecting combine accuracy, reliability, consistency. This can be difficult, especially when you merge new data sources which you have not introduced. So in a way, I believe we have an opportunity to continue to have data for prosperity, but this requires also the same quantum leap in skills and competencies of the people with dealing with data.
Yeah, I think we mentioned quality, we mentioned privacy, we mentioned security, and we mentioned knowledge, and it all comes down to the future. And essentially, we touched upon it, which is artificial intelligence, and that's completely dependent on the data that is informing it, the data that it is learning from, and the quality of that. And if there are questions over sharing that data, whether in healthcare or other sectors, and we can't agree on standards and how we should approach it, then it seems to me, and I don't know if Raphael, you agree from a data point of view, that it will result in a lack of access, equitable access for everybody to the kind of AI that they will need.
Well, actually, I think you have hit on a very crucial thing, because artificial intelligence, and the same with the unstructured big data sets, they are unstructured, and artificial intelligence seeks to learn. Machine learning, it will learn from the practices and the existing data in the web and in the markets. So we need to have clear definitions and clear guidelines to facilitate this process, not to compete, because official statistics sometimes feel that they compete with this type of... No, it's just to harness, to take the best of them, and particularly through the standard setting that we have in the variables of the world of work, that fortunately we are one of the domains where we have more long-established definitions. You have touched on unpaid work and the need to have important data, because there are gaps on that, the role of gender. Well, labor statisticians have been addressing this, and they have now adapted to this, and they have established new definitions that will channel these new emerging topics, the same with digital work, etc., informality, things that they can put them in the web, and countries will start producing the data according to these standards. And then, of course, artificial intelligence would have better grounds to work on and to enhance the data that we have for policymaking.
I mean, for AI to serve women or any other minority, or not minority, but any other underserved group to this point, women have to own the data, don't they? That they provide to the AI, and at the moment, they do not, right?
Exactly, because all this data can be skewed on the basis of race, ethnicity, sex, age, geographical location, disability status. So what is fed in is what you'll get out.
And we have this legacy, yes, because venerable institutions like OECD or the ILO or even the UN, you have a legacy that you have to kind of get past to ensure that the data is, shall we say, not prejudice, if you like.
Yeah, I think it's crucial, because the ethics in the data production is the responsibility of everybody. It's not only the government, it's also the data producers and the data.
We have literally 10 seconds left, and I just want to get a last word from Andreas at the end. I mean, from a real bird's eye view, to the policymakers in the audience, what's your advice when it comes to data culture in their organization? And what can they learn from what the OECD is doing, if you are doing anything?
In 10 seconds, invest in skills of your people.
Skills. Would you agree, Raphael?
I would say So on data possibility of production by countries and by other stakeholders.
And Dr. Jean, the last word literally to you.
I would really say that non-traditional methods, particularly in the gender space, in the policy space, need greater legitimacy, and we need standard setting and a whole range of things that has already been mentioned to see that we get really good quality data, non-biased data.
Thank you to all of you in the audience for being with us, and please join me in thanking our panel.